You're very welcome to another episode of the Scaling Your Business podcast. For this episode, I'm joined by James Dennis, the co-founder of Deoca. I hope I pronounced that right. But a little bit of background on James before I introduce him is this is one of the many testimonials featured on James' LinkedIn account. James was a key contributor to the project that launched Tesco Mobile Ireland. He supplied expert telecoms, core networks, and charging systems knowledge along with hands-on experience to the project. He was hardworking, creative, and reliable. He worked very well with the project team, customers, suppliers, and telecoms industry stakeholders. He often played a key coordinating role within the team. I have no hesitation in endorsing James's work. James, Dennis, you're very welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much.
Delighted to have you here. Me on. No worries. I hope I pronounced that right. Is it Deoca, or you can correct me?
Yeah, no, it's right. It's not a name I chose. Two of the other co-founders were Limerick-based at the time, and it's the name, I'm told, I could be wrong, so if they just spun me a line, then it's continued, it's had its own life. It's the name of the deer symbol on the Munster rugby shirt. That's what I'm told.
Okay.
Anyway,
are you a Munster fan yourself, or a Leinster fan, or are you into sports?
I watch, but the only sports I'm really into is swimming. That's my thing.
Okay.
And so I normally swim in the sea daily, and I do somewhere between, I'm just going to sound a bit postal, somewhere between a kilometre and 2 kilometres
wow,
a day.
That's impressive.
And I swam in school, so it's
okay.
And a lot of the problems and work, a lot of the issues that I've come across in work I've solved by swimming, because it's a space where there's no one going to interrupt you. You can see the light and the horizon when you're there, so it clears your head. And theoretically, you should be just thinking about breathing and relaxing. But if you've got some issue you need to work out, it's a fantastic space just where you can mull something over in your mind and come out with a eureka moment. So there you go.
Yeah, I know you mentioned the other week in an email that you were out swimming at Black Rock, and I've swam a couple of times myself out there, and I really like it. I've never been to a proper, well, I have kind of a swimming event. One of my good friends, I'm from Invertoton, County Meath, and a friend that I went to school with for over 2 decades, his name is James Scully. He was a Paralympic swimmer for Ireland, got a bronze medal in the Worlds in Canada in 2015, and so I've flown over to London for the Paralympics to support him, and I always enjoyed the atmosphere in the stadiums watching the swimming events.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, I know a good few swimmers as well. It's I think the only person who's really got very far I've met a few channel swimmers, and that's because the open water sea community includes a lot of people like that. And then there's a friend of mine from Canada who was on the Canadian Olympic team, who has a house beside my house in Valencia in Southwest Kerry, where my dad was from, where my grandfather's moved.
Okay, well, let's jump into this. You grew up in, I'm assuming Dublin, because I saw that you went to Belvedere College.
Yeah.
Any favorite standout memories from growing up in Dublin City?
It's a good question. I think what I was lucky with, I grew up in Sandymount, which is nice, very leafy suburban. Nice being the opposite of work, but it was a bit different then. There was no electric gates. People's gates were open, and you could walk it to someone's door, and I think it's a little bit different now. And then I was lucky I went to school in town, because basically you moved from there right into the centre of Dublin, and it was the middle of the heroin epidemic in Dublin at the time. So you got an exposure to, you got outside of your bubble. You moved outside of your bubble and met people that you wouldn't normally have met if you just went to the locals. And that also helped, I think, when later on in work life, when I went to some of the more challenging places in the world, that you learned how to talk to people, you learned how to respect people, you learned what people needed. Like, so if you're in a rough area of the world, the local gangster, all he really wants is someone to respect him. So if you show him that, fear isn't respect, acknowledgement is respect.
So nice.
Yeah.
Sticking with those early
Not that
days.
Belvedere is not that Belvedere is particularly rough, but just basically moving from the suburb and moving into town. Belvedere was not a rough school. It's also a little enclave onto itself as well, with fantastic facilities. And that's where I took up swimming.
It's a well-respected school. It is out there.
Yep.
Who do you think inspired you most while you were growing up in Sandymount? Or you can answer it this way: who do you think had the biggest impact on you while growing up?
I would say it's got to be my parents. They're both very hardworking. My father had 3 jobs at any one time. He worked as a broker in Davies. He taught economics at UCD, and he wrote articles for newspapers. So one side, and my mother was a doctor, and she practiced at home, and she also. I grew up in a reasonably large family of 7, so she managed the house as well as her practice. So both of them are extremely hardworking.
Yeah, well, that's for sure. You mentioned your dad taught economics at UCD. Did he have any influence on your decision to study BCom at UCD?
Slightly. I think the reason I did a BCom was I didn't know what I wanted to do, and it was a very general degree. So to me, it was essentially treading water while I worked out what I wanted to do.
Okay. Okay.
And it seemed like a very general, relatively useful degree. Didn't qualify you for anything, but gave you kind of a toe in the water into a number of different things, and give you a confidence in the business world, which might be overconfidence, but basically some degree of confidence. So that's why I did commerce. Then I worked out.
Go on.
After I worked out what I should be doing, but that took a long time.
What brought your father up to Dublin? Because you've mentioned that your grandfather was from Kerry, your father was from Kerry, but you grew up in Dublin.
My grandfather was from Cornwall, and he moved to the west coast of Ireland for the fabulous economic opportunity that was open at the time in telecoms, which essentially was the transatlantic cable. The landing point was in Valencia, and he worked in the cable station there. So one of my father's aunts lived in Dublin, and my grandmother asked her sister, where should we send Richard to school? Because they wanted to send him to the best school they could think of, and her sister recommended Belvedere. So when he was 12, he moved to Dublin and went to Belvedere and lived with his aunt. And my grandfather and my grandmother stayed in Valencia until the cable station closed, actually. They worked there until 1966.
Wow. Okay.
So I still have the house there, and I spent a couple of the months of the year down there. And I spent from December till March this year down there, which is quite nice.
Yeah, beautiful part of the world down there. It is. That's without question. You've worked at companies like Ericsson, Meteor, Digicel. You've been CTO at Cubic Telecom. This is all before you went out by yourself. Any lessons learned or key takeaways from honing your craft at companies like Ericsson, Meteor, and all the others I mentioned?
Ericsson was fantastic in that it's a true multicultural company, a massive, basically a massive multinational. They have offices all over the world. At one time, the stat was that 30% of all calls go through some form of Ericsson equipment somewhere in the world. It may have been higher in the past, but about 30%. So a lot of the patents in 4G and 5G, Ericsson holds the majority of patents in 5G. They hold a lot of patents in 4G too. So it's an incredible environment to learn. They're incredible people. It's provided structure and exposure to technology at the cutting edge, and still does. So I really enjoyed my time in Ericsson. And there I went in to basically look after an IT system in an office in Dunleary. in the IT team. I was working for a small company in town on Camden Street, and they had a support role out there. They went bang while I was out there, so I had to go out on my own. And I then was asked by Ericsson, they said, you've been looking after IT systems for about a year now. We're looking for people who can explain technical ideas and are willing to explain to others. And basically, they were looking for technical instructors. And to do that, you had to basically learn what you were going to teach and then go out around the world and teach it to their design centers and software test teams. So I taught when I left, I was standing in a lift in Kuala Lumpur, as you are. And I counted that I'd been in 28 countries in the previous 2 years. And I just said, right, I'm going home now and I'm going to take a rest. And my idea of a rest was to go to ESAT Digicel, which was just starting up. The rest idea was no travel. I didn't want to travel anymore. If you told me I was going to go and teach a course in Vanuatu in the morning, I would have just strangled you. Yeah. So anyway, that was fantastic. It was a fantastic experience, and it was great. When you were young, that level of travel was absolutely brilliant.
Mm. So focusing on having worked at other companies, is time working for somewhere else, kind of learning your craft while getting paid to learn your craft, something that you'd recommend for future business owners?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you did ask about other companies. Meteor, I'd say, was the other major influence. I had a fantastic opportunity there because they were still in the middle of the court case. I don't know if most people won't remember, but Meteor had a delayed start because when they won their license, there was a challenge from Orange in the courts here. I think at the time it was the longest court case in terms of days in the Supreme Court in Ireland. I may have got the court level wrong there, but it was the longest at whatever level of court it was. And essentially, they were delayed for 2.5 years launching.
Whoa.
Yeah, it was quite tough. But what we did then was, and I joined 1.5 years before they launched. What we did then was we basically put together a plan what we'd do the day that the license was cleared up, and updated that plan every week so that when the green light came, we'd be up and running in 6 months. So it was a fantastic exercise in planning, and there was immense freedom to experiment because we essentially built a network and weren't shackled by any live customers to look after. We built a network and then we're able to develop services on top of that way before we actually launched. So that was absolutely brilliant. And the person who really promoted that was Pete Quinn, who was one of the Western Wireless team that came over to build Meteor. He was the original CEO.
Okay. So now moving forward to your role as co-founder, is there a commonly held belief about your role, co-founder, founder, whatever you want to put in, that you passionately disagree with?
No.
That's fine.
That's probably a bit short answer.
Okay. Deoca.
Yeah, I think it's essentially you're jack of all trades and master of none is essentially co-founder. You have to do a little bit of everything. Yeah. And that would have been part of the case in the Meteor case as well. Like I was the first one of the first employees there. So basically there was a very small team of people. So you had to do everything until the company grew, and then you can hire more people and people become more specialists. And you mentioned Tesco at the beginning, and Tesco is the same thing. Tesco Mobile was an MVNO in Ireland, and I would have been part of the build team and design team of that. And again, if you're in at the beginning, you have to do a little bit of everything. You have to know a little bit about everything and manage a lot of various areas, which then in a larger organization are specialisms. Okay, so it gives you a very broad, it gives you a great opportunity if you're in startups like that to expose yourself to or be exposed to a whole series of different technologies and to learn them, which you're not going to learn if you join a mature organization, because everything has become quite siloed at that point. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And you've got a lot of experience. Before we continue with business, I'd regret it if I didn't ask, because you said at one point you were in a lift in Kuala Lumpur and you'd been to 28 countries in 2 years. Not trying to push you to suggest to go travel, but if you could go to any country right now, if all restrictions were lifted, what country would that be?
I think, how long am I going for?
A week
is the question. Oh, when are you going for a week? Okay. Yeah, I'd probably just go back to Tokyo. And I'll probably just go straight to Shibuya, which is essentially where you have that, I don't know, it's a famous picture of a crossing, busiest congestion crossing in the world. Yeah. So I used to normally, when I lived in Tokyo, I used to go down to Shibuya on Sunday afternoon and just hang out and watch people. It's basically it. It gives you a glimpse into the future of what's going to happen in the rest of the world. You see about 200 or 300 things while you're there, but only 2 or 3 of them are actually going to make it out of Japan.
What do you mean by that? It gives you a glimpse into the future of the world.
Well, you get to see what technology is going to happen, because the Japanese are very much ahead in the technical space. So 15 years ago, you would have seen RFIDs, essentially the Eddie card, which is basically, everybody does tap pay here now. That's normal. And paying with your phone using tap has become normalized in the last, since the lockdown, it's become very normal because no one wants to touch anything. But you had Felicia, was a payment mechanism on Sony Ericsson phones 14, 15 years ago. That was there in Japan. Tap Pay was there in Japan. QR codes were there and were normal in Japan. So all those things were there 15, maybe even longer now. It could even be 20 years ago. But you'd see them and you'd see other things as well. You'd see so many different ways of interacting. But it'd be hard to tell, how do you filter these and work out which one is going to transport and make its way to the rest of the world? And that's what you get to see in the mega cities of Southeast Asia, Seoul, Tokyo, these massive cities where there's lots of people, there's space for various types of ecosystems and technologies that can survive and thrive there alone, maybe just live there alone, but never make it outside, and other ones that are so useful that they'll make their way to the rest of the world. So you want to see the future, you go there, but it's hard to work out which future you have to see. You have to filter it.
Wow, fantastic. You've got me wanting to change my answer on where I'd travel to if I could go anywhere. Is there, how do I ask this? Let's ask it this way. If secondary schools or primary schools could add one mandatory subject, actually secondary schools could add one mandatory subject to the leaving cert, and you were the decision maker on what that subject was, what would it be?
Art. Okay. It would be drawing. It would basically be, you go to so many meetings and see people trying to draw and they can't. Everybody should be able to draw. You don't have to be a master craftsman. You don't have to be an artist, but you should be able to basically take your idea and explain it as a picture. And that's essentially it. So there should be some level of art available to everybody. That would be my first answer. If I got a second subject, I'd say music, because it changes the way your brain thinks. It quietens the mind. It gives you a focus. I'd say that should be something also that should be part of the curriculum. Both of them are seen as risky subjects by parents, because you might, art in particular, if it's too much scope. The guarantee of getting an A is low in art, where it's much higher in some more predictable subject. But that's it. I think those are things that should be there. I think it would essentially broaden people's education and make them better communicators.
Have you
and deeper thinkers?
Do you play an instrument? And if not, do you have a favorite band or artist?
I don't play an instrument, unfortunately. My kids do. I have a very broad taste in music. So at the moment, I would share it with my 8-year-old's favorite song, and the one he's always asking for is Van Morrison. So
okay,
Astral
good
Week,
choice.
that album. Yeah. So I enjoy that too.
Nice. Who do you look to for mentorship or advice, or are there any books you read or podcasts you listen to?
I have been dipping into Harvard Business Review and looking at some of the stuff there, the interesting archives. In terms, I have friends, people that I've worked with in industry that I would talk to if I have an issue that I want to resolve. And that's basically my go-to point. So there's no one individual, but there would be people that I would go and talk to about an issue. And they would be part of my network of people that I've worked with over the years that either I've worked with directly or have met in industry over the years. And I will basically go push an idea by them or propose a problem to them and see if they can help me. I have big family as well, so my sisters and brothers are all useful touch points as well. If you come from a family of 7, there's basically effectively multi-generational in terms of the age gap between the eldest and the youngest, and they all work in different areas, so they'd be quite useful too.
Yeah. You've achieved a lot in your career today. You know, you're part of the early team at both Tesco and Meteor. You spent quite a bit of time at Ericsson traveling, and you've also been CTO at 2 other separate companies as well, Cubic Telecom being one of them that people might be familiar with. So now being co-founder as well, what continues to drive you?
Interesting challenges, interesting technical challenges are what I normally thrive in. Something that's new. So novelty is also something that attracts me. So a new unsolved problem or something that's perceived as a problem that is too difficult or too challenging for someone else to actually go and tackle. So I'm working on a startup now for the last year, since April last year, in the IoT space, and that's essentially my focus at the minute.
Okay, 2 final questions for you. First one is, I don't know who you live with, but all your loved ones are safe. However, your house is burning down and you can only save one item. What one item would that be?
I just go and get my prescription goggles.
That's a different answer than usual.
Yeah.
We had.
I'm sure it is. You said everybody was safe. That's all I want to get is my prescription goggles so I can go swimming later in the day.
That. The best answer I think I've had yet, or the one that had caught me off guard the most, was someone said they'd go to the fridge to get food so they weren't hungry while the house was burning down. So, final question.
I wouldn't worry about the house.
Yeah. Final question is, I'd like you to imagine it's the end of the decade. So we're now talking as if it's the year 2030, and you're looking back on the last 9 to 10 years. You can answer this personally or professionally, but what would you like to be looking back on if we're imagining now is the year 2030?
I suppose I'd want to do a couple of marathon swims. That's what I want to have seen personally. And then business-wise, I'd like my startup to be established And then family-wise, I'd like my kids to be, they'll be confident and happy as they approach their state exams, which they'll be heading into that space at that point. My eldest son, I want him to be essentially established in his career. So he's studying computer science at the moment. He's in third year.
Nice.
So, there you go.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. James, I've had a great pleasure in spending the last 25, 30 minutes getting to know you a little more. I'm sure the audience have too. But from me, thank you. And I wish all of those three things that you've labeled do come through. But for spending the time with me today, thank you very much.
Great. Thank you.